Michael, first, let me thank you for that very insightful and very engaging presentation and discussion. So you cited one of the differences between the high-tech world and the cultural institutions being one of differences in the perspectives about time frames. And this, in a sense, you translate into a tension between criticality and the innovative impulse, innovative drive. Do you think this is the main kind of divide between the high-tech world and the cultural institutions? Is there something more you can say about this?
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. And I think the answer is complicated. You know, I've heard many times in startup culture, we don't want naysayers around here, we don't want pessimists around here, and that focus is the most important thing. So, you know, the minute somebody in a startup team says, oh, I have this interesting idea, the boss or the funder has a thought bubble above their head going, this guy wants to waste some of my money, you know, doing something off to the side. So I'm saying this because I think we have to respect that. So then it becomes, again, a very difficult negotiation to insert criticality and insert a longer time frame with people that are focused on doing something enthusiastic and fast.
Well, as a director of a museum and also a curator, I think one of the kind of tensions that we face in engaging with technology and digital technology is how some of the experiences, the virtual experiences, say recreating a virtual museum of an actual gallery space, would detract from visitors actually coming to the museum and experiencing the space, as well as having digital devices in the galleries, which again would distract visitors from that kind of primary experience with the work of art. How do you think about issues like this?
Again, another very good question. If we go back to pre-electronic documentation, to things like the coffee table, the art book, I don't know for sure, but I would be confident that at the end, that's a win-win situation for people that cannot visit an art museum, and for people that it becomes a special pilgrimage to go and see the original work and they appreciate it even more.
So a reversal of the Benjaminian notion of the aura being taken away from the artwork the moment.
Now, yeah, it probably deals with the level of personal commitment of the people involved. I absolutely, in my heart, believe that someone who is impassioned about a particular piece of any kind of cultural art or artifact will plenty much see the aura when they finally make the pilgrimage and see it for real.
Okay, you also brought up the role of technology in the recent presidential elections. So we all kind of read the furor over Facebook and how it was propagating kind of fake news. So this goes a bit about the criticality you mentioned that that innovators now have to think about. How do you think this can be implemented?
Yeah, you know, and I have to admit, I was debating whether to bring this whole thing up, you know, here. But it's huge. And even the politics aside, the misinformation and the responsibility of these companies, and having, you know, had the privilege of spending time on the ground in these companies, you walk around and it really is, most of the people are under 30. They're all very, very smart. Most of them, I'm sure, didn't vote for Trump. I mean, you know, they're sort of liberal and probably even visionary, if you think about it. But they're focused on whatever knob is on a 7, they want to turn it up to 8. You know, whatever's on an 8, they want to turn it up to 9. And it's a very engineering-specific focus. And to change that, to get Google and Facebook and Twitter to hire people like you know, I think would be a hugely good investment. But that also means that people like you are going to have to reach out probably more than halfway, because they won't get it and you're going to have to work on that.
Okay, at this point, maybe we can open up questions to the floor. Yes, we have a question.
Hi, I'm Honor from the Art Science Museum. Hi. It was so fantastic to see these, paradigmatically important early examples of media art, which in so many cases has presaged or preceded, these technological innovations that we now take for granted. And I'm fascinated in your current position within Google's VR labs. So when you share these examples with your colleagues in Google, what's their reaction? Because I'm sure they're surprised, right? To note that VR has a 30-year history, that self-driving cars kind of have been around for a long time. What's the kind of dialogue like with you and the engineers there?
Well, firstly, just to be clear, my residency was a finite thing that was 5 months last year, and then working to get the stuff published just a couple months ago. So it was kind of, as an outsider's perspective. It's a difficult question to answer because the default state is they don't see any reason why looking back beyond 2 years has any value for them. And and I hear some laughter, but it's a hard task for someone like me to say anything and purge it of sentimentality, ego, historicity, and focus on this is something that is either going to help you save money or help you be more creative. And it turns out there are many, many examples like that, and I'm not alone.
Do we have other questions for Michael? One over there.
Hi, my name's Emily. I teach at the National University of Singapore in sociology. Thanks for sharing these really awesome projects. Just a question I had thinking about us being here in this very hyper-urban space. I feel like there's an ethos in a lot of your work that draws on a certain rural-urban motif. The idea of salvaging what makes special places special seems to be sort of entangled with a kind of rural-urban feel that's very sort of 70s America, very sort of Dylan and folk music and American folklore and so on. And I'm wondering, in your experience, having worked with technology for 30, 40, 50 years, has 40 years of digital connectivity modulated that sort of rural-urban paradigm? And is it different in America versus all the other places in the world that you've been? And sort of how do we sort of relate to that from this very hyper-urbanized city that's yet surrounded by rural hinterlands, but so alienated from them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I can only partly answer it because I am my age and I am American and I did grow up, in the Midwest and all that kind of stuff. But without getting philosophical, there's a very real agenda here on my part to at least lobby for, and that's fear of cultural extinction, and nothing less than that. And when you look at something like eco-travel, that I see no evidence that the millennials are any less interested in than anybody else, these places that are special for either cultural or physical reasons, many of them are on the verge of extinction. So, again, this is easy to sort of digress into like generation and philosophy, but to me there's a very solid and urgent agenda to deal with.
Yes, one question here at the front.
Hi, I'm Jane Jacobs from Yale NUS College. Thank you for a terrifically interesting talk. And again, I was also interested in, the history that was there that I didn't realise, and the similarity between the experiences we're having and the experiences that you were creating in your earlier work. What struck me, and it really is a question about, you produced a divide between content and technology, but what was really apparent from your early work was how hard the process was. That is, there were a lot of things that you had to innovate around in order to create the images that you were working with. And I'm interested in what does it do, because presumably that slows things down a little bit. What is the difference between now and then around this issue of process, the actual making of the images? One feels that analogue, when you're putting pieces together, is a little bit more transparent, like the car that we used to be able to fix, versus the invisibility or the hard to get at digital knowledge, which is about experts and things we can't intervene in unless we have a particular kind of skill set. And, you know, maybe I'm also of an age, I understand all the students I teach have those skill sets to hack that digital world. But I'm interested in the process, and you reflecting on that difference between the way you worked early and now.
Again, thank you, and that's a complicated question, and I'll try not to plummet into a little bit of cynicism here. VR, if you do just a cursory, Google search, you'll find a lot of chatter about it's been around for years, but that it, was bad and that kind of stuff. And you hear words like scale and market and deployability today. And that's all good. And this is sort of the moment that a lot of us have been waiting for. But what's happened in the case, for example, of virtual reality is that it's like 99% D is in development and 1% R is in research. And to sit in meetings and say, I have an interesting new idea, unless it falls into like an instant startup thing, you're wasting their money. It's out the door. And I don't want to be cynical about that. I want to be excited about that because that's the natural process of something that's been, brewing for many, many years. With that said, I'm literally, like my kind of micro specialty is often around, I geek out on cameras, VR cameras and stuff. And I'm watching both a lot of poorly designed cameras coming out of the startup community because people have not done their homework, and cameras coming out of the big players, some of which I've been actively involved in, with, I don't know whether to call it a confidence or a hubris, that they know how to design the right cameras for other people to use. So, there to me is a delicacy about how to complete the loop between, I guess I would add a wide range of consumers, and not only the consumers that these companies think are the right ones. Does that help? Okay, good.
Any further questions? Yes, one here.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I have a question. Can you say a little bit about digital culture and commodification? Because I think it's really interesting. And the struggle the artists had when the Media Lab started, that basically innovative ideas of artists will be exploited later by startups and other companies without giving the credit to the innovators, and not even only in financial terms, but just in the sense of crediting ideas and creation. And you have been involved in that. Maybe you can say a little bit in that.
Yeah, that's another. It's a good, hard question, as you know. And I used to think that if artists working in technology are inventing, that the whole patent system is ideally suited as a way to protect, especially if A, the artist isn't interested in scalability and market, and B, if it might take years or sometimes decades. I'm not one of the people who think I'm credited with inventing the like button, but hundreds of millions of dollars have gone back and forth on a patent that I'm listed as lead inventor on that I have no financial interest in. I'm not sure if invention is the best, or patent's the best way. Laurie Anderson and I, artist Laurie Anderson, who's a friend and I, have had several discussions about this because she adamantly believes that once an artist releases something to the world, it's gone. And I realized after some of our conversations that in a way, is what objectification and particularly signature does. So you cash in early, And I have mixed feelings about this. And then artists like Christo and Jean-Claude have kind of used the commodification and the collector, the whole infrastructure to fund more ethereal work. I would love to see new models here, and that's a challenge to you all.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Joshua. EDB. Just to maybe pull out a couple of themes, because it was a great talk. We went pretty fast. I want to pull out a couple of things. So there's a kind of a time paradox between the long experience needed and then quick action, to get it done in startups. I just want to ask what you think the roles of institutions are in holding that space and bridging that space. I've got one or two other questions, but maybe just this one first. Yeah.
I tried very hard, and so far not successfully, with leadership at places like Google and others, to respect their need to stay mainframe and deal with the fast cycles that they have, except some small percent. This would be like percent for art and architecture, and whether it's 1 or 2 or 5%. The artist community traditionally works several orders of magnitude cheaper than a lot of the industrial community. So a little bit of money set aside, to me, could have a huge leverage. And I don't know why, and this isn't the first time I've tried this in my life, it's hard for the large corporations to maybe deal with the weirdness or diversity or scruffiness of this other community, even if it's a small percentage. But again, I'm on this. I keep trying. I think it's a huge symbiotic win to have them both together in kind of a fair balance.
What about the art institutions reaching out in the other direction? What is the space of the art institution?
I used to think that the art institutions, if they reached halfway to the corporations, they would find a common ground, until someone with an arts institution said, it's worse than that, because the corporations might not know what they don't know, and you're going to have to reach out more than half. And I think that's true. And it's, again, a great deal of my time is spent trying to get under the skin. And I mean this in a sincere and sort of respectful way of people that work in these corporations, to try to understand them and to articulate why a little bit of unfettered creativity, a little bit of projects that might not guarantee an immediate return would be good investments. And the other thing to add, I know of no business school case study done, but I would wager that the percentage of projects that hit the big time that began as small, modest initiatives probably were as many, percentage-wise, as the big sort of programmed, expensive blockbusters.
Yes, one more question here.
Thank you. My name is Yasu Ota, a Japanese journalist based in Singapore. I studied in MIT. And my question is, being in Asia, we are witnessing the many valuable culture, tradition, recipes, or arts are disappearing in front of us. Particularly in Singapore, coming from Tokyo to Singapore, I came here last year, and I see the rich culture is here, in deep history, the Indian heritage, Chinese, and everything. But it's kind of sacrificed by the economic growth. I mean, in the Singapore government has give the priority to economic growth rather than, and by sealing that history, and it worked quite well. But just wondering if what we can do with the technology you have to give the value to the past legacy. Otherwise, it cannot have a sustainability to keep going on. And what do you think is the role of the government? You're talking about the Google and the major corporation, but there seems to be something that the government can play the role.
I have a fantasy that one morning we're all going to get up, and maybe through one or two individuals in the high-tech community, maybe beginning in Silicon Valley, maybe not, all of the engineers will discover something like meditation or some kind of internal, questioning of what is life and the importance of things like that, and realize that being grounded is as important as reaching for the sky, and that they can actually help each other. Oh, but that's just a fantasy, isn't it? I do think that something like that does come and go, but I honestly, God, don't know how to convince somebody, especially who's earning a lot of money in the corporate sector and doing very skybound stuff, the importance of the past and history, and how the government can fit in. I wish I knew the answer, and I again welcome you all to, I challenge you to discuss it. But what it takes for somebody to say, oh wow, I just learned something about my Indian heritage here, and you know what, I feel more whole, and I'm going to get up tomorrow morning and, breathe better and interact with people better and work better. I wish I knew the answer to that.
Yes. And, other questions? Yes, Kenny.
Hello, Michael. It's Kenny again, from the director of the Asian Civilizations Museum. You used the word hyperreal a lot in your presentation, and many of your projects have to do with the pursuit of the hyperreal. I was just wondering what drives you that direction. What fascinates you about the hyperreal?
Yeah, I'm not sure where exactly that comes from. A lot of the earlier work I did began trying to replicate reality, and it wasn't entirely successful. And I'd go, this kind of looks better. Just a little anecdote, because I'm not alone in this. In 1927, an absolutely awesome film came out of Paris called Napoleon by French filmmaker Abel Gance, years in the making. And cast of thousands, opened at the Paris Opera House, 15-minute standing ovation. It had a 3-screen triptych that Gance, like your question about being engaged with the technology itself, had to invent a 3-screen camera system and projection system before Cinerama and things like that. It turns out, and of course the reason he did it was to convey this panoramic landscape of war scenes and Napoleon on his white horse running from one screen to another. But it turns out he got equally interested in the montage aspect of having, for example, 3 close-ups at the same time. He found it emotionally riveting, and it wasn't why he started. And I'm no expert at this at all, but I think that artists often have a funny tension between trying to replicate verisimilitude and being drawn into some level of abstraction, or in my case, a kind of abstraction called hyperrealism.
Okay. Any further questions for Michael? Okay, maybe let me ask a follow-up question to some of the thing about the history of this. You talked a bit about this in your talk, about how in the 60s and 70s, this relationship between art and technology was also very strong. And the 60s and 70s was, as we know, a very important time for technological advancement. We had space travel and all of that. And artists were equally fascinated by all of that was happening. Do you see what's happening now, a return to that whole period again? And what are some of the lessons we can learn from that?
It's a good question. And I'm going to channel on this one, because I hear 2 predominantly points of view that are somewhat different. Back then, you really not only had to invent stuff from scratch, but it was relatively expensive, which meant you needed a level of dedication and commitment that anyone who's building a new app for the iPhone does not need. So half of my colleagues say that's great, you know, access is good, and the other half say that it results in a lot of kind of fast, not very good quality stuff. And I think they're both right, and it changes the paradigm. It means, to me at least, that rather than a small number of very, very dedicated people producing relatively high quality stuff, you have many, many, many more people producing, on average, perhaps lower quality, but the absolute number of high quality stuff is probably increasing. So the paradigm, especially for curators like you, is rather than dealing with old guard, you're now looking for needles in the haystack. And I think that's a good thing.
Okay, and I think with that, unless there are any final questions for Michael? No? With that, please let us thank Michael again for his talk. And his
Thank you all. Great questions.